am Nora Bennett, 63 years old, and for 35 years I believed I had a steady marriage. But at exactly 11 o'clock one morning, everything shifted because of something so small and ordinary that it almost didn't feel real at first. A birthday card. I had been searching through Tom's desk for some tax papers when I found it. The envelope was tucked into the back of a drawer, as if it had been hidden on purpose. The handwriting was delicate, looping in a way I instantly recognized wasn't mine. Inside was a card with a lake at sunset, and the words were simple, almost innocent. But at the bottom, it was signed, "With love, Lauren and Ava." My heart gave a sharp twist. I had known that Tom sent money every single month, $500 like clockwork, to a woman he called his sister living in rural Vermont. I had accepted his explanation for years, that she was struggling after her husband passed away, that she needed help raising her child. "Family helps family," he would say, and I convinced myself it was none of my business. But that morning, staring at the name Ava, someone I had never heard of, I knew deep down something was wrong. I felt the weight of years pressing in on me. Why had I never been invited to meet this so-called sister? Why had every suggestion to join him on his weekend trips been brushed aside? I took a picture of the return address with shaking hands and slid the card back exactly as I had found it. And in that moment, I understood that my life might be about to fracture in ways I couldn't yet imagine. I remember thinking, if you're listening to this, maybe you've had a moment like that too. A moment when something small suddenly cracked open the truth you were afraid to face. That card was mine, and it was only the beginning. When I think back over those years, I realize how easy it was for me to believe what Tom told me. He always had this calm, confident tone whenever I asked about money. He handled everything: our investments, our retirement accounts, his business income. My world was narrowed down to one checking account, enough to cover groceries and household needs, and I accepted it because he insisted that the rest was too complicated, that I should let him worry about it. For 8 years, I watched him transfer money every single month to this woman in Vermont. $500, steady as the calendar. At first, I asked questions. He told me she was his sister, that her husband had died young, that she was raising a child alone. He said family should take care of family, and I believed him. In fact, I even felt guilty for doubting him, as if my hesitation was a failure of compassion. And then there were the trips. About 6 years ago, Tom began leaving once a month, sometimes twice, driving out on Saturdays for what he called property repairs and errands. He always had a reason I couldn't come along. He told me the house was too small for visitors. He said his sister was shy, or that she was going through a rough time. I remember telling myself that I was being thoughtful by not pressing harder. I see now how convenient my silence must have been for him. Looking back, I should have paid closer attention. The quick showers as soon as he got home. The phone always turned face down on the table, the faint traces of a detergent I didn't use. But I told myself marriage meant trust. I told myself I was lucky to have a man who worked hard, provided for us, and still cared about family obligations. I can hear some of you wondering, how could I not see it sooner? The truth is, when you love someone, you learn to ignore certain signs. You convince yourself they don't mean what they seem to mean. You build a story that feels safe to live inside, until one day, something small, a birthday card, blows a hole through it. That's why, after finding that card, I knew I had to see for myself. I couldn't rely on his words anymore. And so, I made the decision to drive to Vermont. The morning I set out for Vermont, I kept telling myself I was overreacting. 4 hours behind the wheel gave me plenty of time to rehearse excuses for what I might find. Maybe I had misunderstood the card. Maybe Lauren really was his sister, and Ava was just some distant relative I had never heard of. But beneath all that rationalizing was a pit in my stomach that wouldn't let me rest. The further I drove, the quieter the world around me became. Suburbs faded into open fields, then stretches of dark forest. The GPS eventually guided me onto a dirt road, and by the time I turned onto a narrow lane with no signs of neighbors, I already knew in my heart this wasn't going to look like the story Tom had been telling me. When the house finally came into view, my hands tightened on the steering wheel. It was small, but immaculate. Fresh paint on the shutters, flower boxes blooming under the windows, a wide porch that looked recently restored. Behind it, I could see a neat barn, a greenhouse, even solar panels glinting in the daylight. In the side yard stood a swing set that easily cost more than $1,000. Nothing about this scene said struggling widow in need of charity. And then, parked in the gravel driveway, I saw Tom's silver Lexus, angled as if he had pulled in quickly. It was 11:10 in the morning, and according to him, he should have been in his Boston office reviewing contracts. But there was his car, sitting plain as day. I pulled my own car off the lane and stopped behind a thick hedge about 50 yards back. My heart was hammering. I cut the engine and just sat there, staring at that picture-perfect farmhouse with its cheerful blue shutters, trying to reconcile it with the version of hardship Tom had described for years. I had never imagined myself as the kind of woman who spies on her own husband, but I had packed a pair of binoculars that morning. At 63 years old, I felt ridiculous pulling them out, and yet I lifted them to my eyes because I needed to see. I needed to know. That moment sitting in my car, hidden, breath shallow, hands trembling, was the point where denial finally slipped away. Something here was not right, and I was about to learn just how wrong it really was. Through the binoculars, I saw the front door open. A woman stepped out, younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s. She had auburn hair pulled into a ponytail, jeans that fit well, and a sweater that hugged her figure. She moved with ease, confidence even, like someone comfortable in her own space. Nothing about her looked like a shy recluse hiding from the world. She walked to a dark SUV parked beside Tom's Lexus, reached into the back seat, and then turned toward the porch. I will never forget what I saw next. Tom appeared in the doorway. He wasn't stiff or distant. He wasn't the brother checking on a struggling sibling. He leaned in, and she lifted her face to meet him. It was a kiss. Not the kind that leaves room for doubt, but one that spoke of years of closeness. The binoculars slipped from my hands and hit the steering wheel. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might faint. In that instant, the story I had been told for 8 years collapsed. This was no sister. And then, just as I was struggling to breathe, another figure appeared. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, burst through the door laughing, her curls bouncing as she ran across the yard. Tom followed, chasing her with playful energy I hadn't seen in years. When he scooped her up, I froze. Her nose, her smile, it was him. My husband's face echoed back in that child, watching them together, seeing him swing her around while the woman, his so-called sister, looked on with a tender smile. I realized the full scope of it. This wasn't just an affair. It was a family. A life built quietly and carefully behind my back while I sat at home, believing in his charity and business trips. I stayed hidden, my body trembling as the truth pressed down on me. Tom hadn't simply lied about where he was going. He had built an entire second life, complete with a partner, a home, and a child who carried his blood. It hit me then, everything I thought I knew about my marriage was a half-truth at best. And as painful as that was, I couldn't turn away. I needed to see more. I needed to understand the depth of the betrayal before I confronted it. I sat in that car for what felt like forever, heart pounding, hands damp against the steering wheel. Every instinct in me wanted to storm up that driveway, pound on the door, and demand the truth. But another part of me, the lawyer's wife who had learned to read silence and calculate timing, told me to wait. I needed to walk in steady, not shaking. When I finally stepped out, the gravel crunched under my shoes, loud in the still air. I walked up the porch and knocked, and the moment that door opened, I felt the whole fragile structure of his lies start to collapse. The young woman Lauren looked at me with a puzzled smile that froze almost instantly. Behind her, I heard Tom's quick footsteps. The look on his face, that flash of panic, confirmed what my heart already knew. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't scream. Instead, I introduced myself with calm precision. I was Nora Bennett, his wife of 35 years. I could see the blood drain from her face as the weight of it hit her. Tom's eyes widened, his mouth moving with the beginnings of excuses I didn't care to hear. I remember thinking how strange it was that the quieter I became, the louder their guilt felt in that room. Inside, the truth spilled out without me even asking much. Lauren admitted what Tom never would have dared say. She told me her real name, not the invented sister identity. She confessed the years 9 in total that she had spent in this hidden relationship. And then came the part that broke me open. Ava was his daughter, standing there. I scanned the living room. Family photographs lined the mantel, Lauren and Tom laughing on a beach, Tom cradling a newborn, matching outfits at a pumpkin patch. The walls told a story I had never been given a chance to read. It wasn't just an affair. It was an entire family album, curated without me. I felt myself detach in that moment, almost watching from outside my own body. My voice stayed calm, but my chest ached. After decades of loyalty, I had become the outsider in my own marriage, and as much as I wanted to break down, I knew this was only the surface of what I was about to uncover. As devastating as it was to learn about Lauren and Ava, the next blow was even heavier. I had spent years thinking Tom's generosity amounted to $500 a month, a quiet act of support for a sister I had never met. But inside that house, I discovered the truth. It wasn't 500. It was 2,000, sometimes more, month after month, and it hadn't stopped there. Tucked away in a black leather binder in what Tom called his office, I saw the ledger of a man who had built a life with meticulous detail. Every payment was recorded down to the dollar. A $50,000 down payment on the farmhouse, $32,000 in renovations, $40,000 for the SUV that sat in the driveway, $12,000 for hospital bills when Ava was born, tuition, gymnastics lessons, summer camps, line after line, page after page. By the time I reached the end, the total stared back at me like a cruel joke: $378,000. That was money siphoned from the life we had built together. Money I thought was securing our retirement. Money that could have helped our sons as they started their own families. But it didn't stop there. I thought about the second mortgage Tom had convinced me to sign the year before. He had told me it was for restructuring, tax advantages, a smart financial move. In reality, it had been another channel to fund this parallel life. My name, my credit, my trust, all leveraged without my knowledge. Standing in that room, holding evidence of years of deceit, I felt a strange stillness come over me. It wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was betrayal in its purest form, emotional, financial, and legal. My marriage hadn't just been shared, it had been stolen. And in that stillness, one thought crystallized. I couldn't let anger drive me. I needed clarity. I needed proof. And I needed the right kind of help. Because this was no longer just about love or trust. It was about survival. That's when I knew my next step would be to call an attorney. Driving back to Boston that afternoon, my mind was strangely calm. The shock had burned through, leaving a kind of cold determination in its place. I couldn't undo what Tom had done, but I could stop him from draining any more of our life away. The first call I made was to my attorney, Richard Hale. It was 6:30 in the evening when I reached him, and I remember apologizing for the urgency, though in truth, I felt no guilt. I needed to know what steps to take before Tom sensed that I had discovered his secrets. Richard's response was steady and direct: freeze the joint accounts immediately. Any withdrawal over $500 had to be blocked until further notice. That simple action gave me my first breath of relief in days. That night, I walked through our home with new eyes. The house we had lived in for 28 years suddenly felt like a stranger's museum, filled with memories built on half-truths. I began packing Tom's clothes into black garbage bags, not out of anger, but out of necessity. My lawyer had warned me not to confront him directly, not to give him room to manipulate or maneuver. If I let words slip, he could twist them. So I focused on action. 12 bags lined the garage by the time I finished. In the process, I found more than just clothes. Tucked into drawers were 3 prepaid phones, each one filled with messages and photos, Ava's birthday parties, family outings, weekends that had been disguised as conferences. Evidence of a parallel reality that had existed alongside mine for almost a decade. It wasn't just cheating. It was a second existence, carefully built, carefully hidden. When I finally sat down with a glass of water, exhaustion swept over me. But there was also a strange clarity. This wasn't a matter for arguments anymore. It was a matter for courts, lawyers, and accountability. For the first time in days, I felt a plan forming. And that plan would carry me into the next chapter, the one where Tom's lies grew even darker than I ever imagined. A few days after I froze the accounts, I got a call I didn't expect from Lauren. Her voice carried a tension that made my stomach sink. She wanted to meet, and she sounded almost desperate, against every instinct. I agreed. We chose a small coffee shop halfway between us, and at 10 o'clock in the morning, I walked inside to find her already waiting. She looked pale. Her eyes rimmed red as though she hadn't slept in days. She slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were documents she had found in Tom's office at the farmhouse. What I read made my blood run cold. The first was a will, drafted just 3 weeks earlier. In it, Tom left everything: our home, our accounts, even his retirement savings to Lauren and Ava. My name appeared only once, in a clause that specifically cut me out, citing financial disagreements. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was erasure. Then came the power of attorney. Tom had given Lauren full control over his decisions should he become incapacitated. As if I, his wife of 3 decades, had ceased to exist. But the hardest blow was at the bottom of the stacked medical records. Tom had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer 8 months earlier. He hadn't told me. He hadn't told her either, not until recently. He had carried this secret while still building his double life, pretending that everything was business as usual. And there was more. He had taken out 3 life insurance policies, worth $2 million in total. The beneficiaries were Lauren and Ava, not me, not our sons. He had set it up so that when he died, they would inherit everything, while I would be left with the debts, the second mortgage, the credit cards, the obligations tied to my name. Lauren sat across from me, her face tight with shame. She told me she hadn't known the depth of his deception, that she had believed the money came from his bonuses. I believed her because I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't holding power in this situation. She was just as caught in his web as I was. It was in that moment that I realized Tom's betrayal wasn't only about love or fidelity. It was about strategy. He had been planning for his death like it was a business deal, tying up loose ends in a way that would leave me ruined and invisible, while presenting himself as a provider to his other family. I walked out of that coffee shop trembling, but with a new clarity. This wasn't only a marriage betrayal, it was a deliberate scheme. And if Tom thought he could orchestrate the ending of my life story along with his, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Sitting across from Lauren that morning, I expected to feel hatred. Instead, what I felt was something closer to recognition. We were two women bound by the same man's lies, both manipulated into roles we hadn't chosen. I had been the wife he erased, and she had been the mistress-turned-stand-in wife without realizing the cost. She told me she had found even more documents, bank transfers, offshore accounts, even a forged deed that showed Tom had tried to move our Boston house into a trust under her name. The signature was a poor imitation of mine, but the attempt was enough to make my stomach twist. As she laid the papers out, her hands shook. I saw in her the same disbelief that had haunted me for weeks. She admitted she had once believed his promises, that he would leave me, that they would start a new life. But when she discovered the cancer and the will, she understood the truth. Tom had never planned to choose either of us. He had only planned for control. I remember sitting in that coffee shop, thinking that maybe I had two choices: to walk away from her forever, or to face this together. Surprisingly, I chose the latter, because in that moment, I realized I couldn't fight him alone. He was a seasoned attorney who had spent his career bending rules to his advantage. If I wanted justice, I needed every piece of evidence, and Lauren had what I didn't. We formed an unlikely alliance, one born not of trust, but of necessity. She gave me copies of everything she had found, and I promised her that I would not let Tom's lies consume either of us any longer. Driving home that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: resolve. Tom had planned his ending like a carefully written script, but now I had the power to rewrite it, and this time he would not control the final act. When I handed Richard the folder Lauren had given me, I saw his expression change with each page. Fraud, forgery, financial abuse, insurance manipulation. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a criminal case waiting to be built. He told me, almost with a spark of grim satisfaction, that we had enough to bring Tom down, not just personally, but professionally, and soon. The wheels of justice began to turn. Federal marshals walked Tom out of his office in handcuffs. The image hit the evening news: my husband, once the confident attorney with polished suits and an untouchable air, now a broken figure shielding his face from the cameras. For decades he had thrived on his reputation, but in less than a minute it was gone. Watching from home, with my sons on either side of me, was surreal. Michael's jaw tightened with rage. James's eyes brimmed with tears. I felt both anger and sorrow, but above all, I felt vindication. For years, Tom had manipulated me into silence, into compliance. Now, his lies were dragged into the light for everyone to see. Lauren called me that night. She told me Ava had seen the news and asked why the police had taken her father away. Lauren said she told her the truth in a way a child could understand, that he had made serious mistakes, and people must face consequences, even the ones we love. That moment broke something inside me. I had never wanted to hurt that little girl, but she too was a victim of his choices. By then, Tom's law license had been suspended. His firm put him on leave. The prosecutor pushed hard, and with the evidence stacked against him, Tom's options narrowed. The man who once controlled everything was finally out of control. And yet, this wasn't the end, because just when I thought justice was settled, a new twist emerged, one that tested my resolve in ways I hadn't expected. Just when I thought Tom's fall had reached the bottom, another twist appeared. His attorney reached out through Richard with a proposal. Tom was ready to plead guilty, to accept restitution, and to turn over every dollar if I agreed to one condition: no public trial. Instead, he wanted house arrest, monitored hospice care, and the chance to spend his last days outside a prison cell. At first, my reaction was simple. Why should I grant mercy to a man who had shown me none? But then, I thought of Ava. She was just a child, and the idea of her watching her father waste away in prison felt unbearably cruel. It wasn't about Tom anymore. It was about sparing an innocent child from an image that would stay with her for the rest of her life. I didn't want to make this decision alone. My sons sat across the table from me in Richard's office when I explained what was being asked. I could see the fury in Michael's face, the disbelief in James's. To them, prison felt like justice. To me, it felt like revenge. And I wasn't sure that revenge was what I wanted anymore. So I set my own conditions. If Tom wanted mercy, he had to earn it. I insisted that he write a full, notarized accounting of every lie, every transfer, every deception. And he had to face our sons directly. To tell them the truth himself, not excuses, not spin, but the raw truth they deserved. Only then would I consider agreeing. The day of that meeting, Tom looked like a shadow of the man I had once known. The illness had stripped him of the arrogance that once defined him. For 2 hours, he spoke. He confessed to the affair, to the money, to the inheritance he had hidden, to the elaborate network of lies that spanned nearly a decade. For once, he didn't posture or justify. He simply told the truth. I listened with a cold kind of clarity, my heart no longer breaking, but settling into acceptance. The damage had been done, but at least the truth was out. And that, I realized, was more powerful than any sentence a judge could hand down. By the end of that meeting, I agreed to the deal. Tom would serve his remaining time under strict house arrest, with hospice care, monitored and controlled. He would never walk free again. And for the first time, I felt that justice and mercy had found a fragile balance. When the deal was finalized, I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in years. It wasn't the kind of happiness people expect after a legal victory. It was something quieter, steadier, freedom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't looking over my shoulder or wondering what Tom was hiding. I had clarity, control, and most of all, I had my life back. The settlement restored not only what he had stolen, but also my sense of power. I used part of it to help my sons, part of it to secure my future, and a portion to set aside for Ava, because she deserved at least one gesture of fairness in a story where she had carried none of the blame. In the months that followed, I allowed myself to breathe again. I traveled. I stood in Florence and looked at Michelangelo's David, realizing the irony of the name didn't sting anymore. I walked along the coast of California, sipping wine and watching sunsets that felt like new beginnings. I built a home for myself that wasn't tied to deception, only to peace. Lauren and I, strange as it was, stayed in touch. She was raising Ava with quiet strength, and every now and then she'd send me a photo, a birthday, a school recital, a first day of class. At first, it hurt to see the echoes of Tom in that little girl's face. But over time, it became something else. A reminder that healing comes in unexpected forms, and that we are all more than the worst things that happen to us. I won't pretend that forgiveness came easily. I never forgave Tom for what he did. But I forgave myself for the years I looked the other way, for the trust I placed where it wasn't deserved, for the silence I carried too long. That forgiveness was the real key to moving on. In the end, I learned that betrayal doesn't get the final word unless you let it. And as the sun sets over my new life, I know with certainty that mine is a story of survival, not defeat. Looking back, I realize this story was never just about betrayal. It was about resilience, about finding the strength to stand tall when the life you trusted falls apart. Tom thought he had written the ending for me. But in truth, I wrote my own. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this: no matter how carefully someone tries to control your story, you always have the power to reclaim it. Even in the darkest chapters, there are choices that can lead to healing, to justice, and to freedom. I don't share this to stir up bitterness, but to remind anyone listening that you're never as powerless as betrayal tries to make you feel. You can choose clarity, you can choose action, and in the end, you can choose yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments, maybe even your own story. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me keep telling these kinds of truths, the ones that remind us we're not alone. And above all, remember this healing is possible, and freedom is worth the fight.